Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic episode, just like always. So today I did not get any questions about Epstein. Somewhat surprised, but I guess we've had 3 straight episodes where that was the main topic, so maybe it is a time to move on to something else. But I do think that reflects this point I always said about Epstein is that people have short attention spans. Their memory doesn't span that long of time. They eventually move on to other topics. Now, Epstein is still around in the news. There's new revelations that are trying to come out about Trump from the investigation, which I think a reason why Trump is agitated about this is that whatever was in the investigation in 2019, the government attorney that was looking into it likely was trying to find a Trump angle. Now, some people are like, well, Trump was president at the time. Guess what? Trump's impeachment was all due to people trying to coup him. And these were all Trump administration staffers who led the fight against him. Even the Russiagate stuff and all this other stuff going on. It was all these rogue agents deciding to do whatever the hell they wanted and to try to coup him. And the guy who was Berman was his last name, who was leading the investigation into Epstein, led prosecutions against Trump allies, against, Trump's wishes. So of course he would try to make a Trump angle to the Epstein thing. And I think a lot of what is in there from the files deals with Trump. And some of the leaks that are coming out appear to be coming from people who had involvement in the investigation, and is probably why. And the fact that Trump put the Epstein stuff in the same limelight as the Trump dossier and the Russiagate stuff, which was all based on fraudulent claims about Trump, like the P-tape and other things, that's probably why he has such agitation for it. But the base was mad about it for a critical pedo theory, as I kept trying to explain it. People are like that. Like, no, it's just all foreign influence. It's like the vast majority of people I wouldn't say vast majority, but the majority of normies aren't that aware of the intel angle and the Israel angle. They're aware that Epstein was involved with powerful people, but the most important thing they know about Epstein is he's a pedophile. And pedophiles are the worst thing in society. It's far worse than foreign influence and foreign intelligence, foreign spying. Though that's something that a lot of normies can't even fucking comprehend. But with pedophile, they're like, oh no, this is bad. And then they think he was involved with powerful people. And, he was proven beyond reasonable doubt in his first trial that he had sexually abused minors. So, and the new trial was all centered around that. So, calling him a pedophile is accurate. But whether other people were doing that remains to be known. And there's more. I mean, I always believe there's more to this case than anything else. But I think with the second investigation that was run by an anti-Trump government official, like many other, this was widespread in the first term. People are probably going to forget this because they think everything runs like the second term, where now officials try to meet Trump's whims. They all decided to try to screw over Trump at any time that they could. It's like the military refused to deploy against the riots and stood with Black Lives Matter. The whole State Department and various officials involved with Ukraine tried to coup Trump over the Zelensky phone call. Russiagate was still carried on by a lot of FBI agents and others. So, this was just common in the administration. And even like political appointees, it's like, the anonymous guy who was Miles Taylor. Miles is his first name, who was like a senior DHS guy, was like, don't worry, we're leading a resistance against him. And so I would not be surprised that, a liberal anti-Trump federal attorney would try to make a case to blow up Trump. And I think that's why it is. I think they're probably most unfounded accusations, but that would be my thing. But people seem to be moving on. That could change this week depending on what new news comes out. But there's just so much other news now. And even with the right is just this weekend was just talking about a lot of other things. I didn't even see many, Epstein related stuff in my replies and mentions. Now, is this going to be last forever? I don't know. But Trump is trying to move his base onto other topics. He empowered Tulsi Gabbard to talk about the Russiagate investigation and collusion between Democrats. And this is actually going to appeal to a lot of the base, because the base, when they think about Epstein, they want it to connect to Democrats, prominent Democrats. And that's why they're so animated by it, because they think Epstein was a member of the Clinton crime family. Some might be like, oh, they're really worked up about Israel connections. Online right is, but the online right is not representative of MAGA. I have an article coming out tomorrow that'll be about this, but they're not that animated about Israel. If you want to see an example of foreign influence leading America to do something stupid, we've got the Iran strikes that just happened a few weeks ago. And what did the base think about that? They thought that was awesome. I'm not saying that as a good thing. I think they're a stupid thing, as we can see what's going on in Syria right now, where Netanyahu's bombing a government that we're friendly with, that we're trying to set up, over stupid reasons of the Druze. And they're like, oh, we're so humanitarian. We're protecting this minority group. And Christians. We're bombing Christians in Palestine. But now we're coming to defend them against the Syrian government. And you're like, how stupid can you be to believe this stuff? They're trying to topple the regime to create a failed state there so they can gobble up more territory and push and place Gazans there and place Palestinians there and turn it into a giant refugee camp. They do not have any interest in the Druze stuff. Is completely just done to it's just a complete excuse. Yeah, Israel's acting on a humanitarian interest for another group. Give me a break. I'm not that stupid. But in any case, if you want to see foreign influence, we have the Iran strikes, where we literally turned into Israel's Air Force. And how did the base react to that? They thought it was awesome. MAGA Republicans were the most supportive of it by far. So if MAGA Republicans are that concerned with foreign influence, you would think that they would have been critical of the Iran strikes. They were not. With Epstein, they care far more about the Clinton Democrat angle than they do the Israeli angle. That is not true for the online right. That is not true for everyone else who has interest in the Epstein case, because pretty much everyone has an interest in the Epstein case. Left, right, normies, apolitical people, political people, a lot of Americans have interest in it. It's not one of the core interests for their voters, I would say that, because, if these polls are accurate, Trump hasn't lost any support among the MAGA base, and I don't think he is. Once again, short attention spans, people are going to move on to other stuff, and he knows how to, what gets his base. And with the Russia stuff, he's like, goes to the top of the Democrats. There's Obama, there's Clinton, and he's accurate there. I'm not saying that that's a conspiracy theory, and I think there is something interesting that is there, and it should be prosecuted. But he knows that this is a case that he can throw out to this base and then get them to focus on that rather than Epstein. And it seems to be working. It's a no-win situation, and it's a tough situation for Trump with Epstein, because there's nothing he could release. The thing that the base wants is, Epstein controlled Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, the Clintons, Obama, even Zoran. I don't know how that would work, but they're going to figure that out. And that's what they want. And it's unlikely to bring in that case. There's definitely more to Epstein than we know. There's a lot of shady stuff there even beyond the human trafficking. Like, how did he make his money? That's a question that's never been fully answered, and that would probably lead us to a lot of revelations about Epstein, and possibly the intel angle. But whatever Trump releases, that's not going to satisfy his base what they want to know. They want the pedo cabal confirmed and that it controls the Democrats, and that's likely not going to happen. But he can offer them Russiagate, which the Democrats tried to coup try to coup Trump and try to destroy his campaign with false accusations, which is true, which has a basis in fact, and the base will be happy with that. And I think with the rest of the public, they just moved on to other topics. There's Colbert's cancellation. There's the Coldplay kisscam. There's all these other topics. People cannot focus on one thing. And the Epstein thing, even though it definitely has a lot of mainstream interest, like there was Trump supporters like, no one cares about this. This is completely online. I'm like, I watched the nightly news at the gym. They were talking about Epstein. CNN was talking about it 24/7, and they're talking about influencers turning on him and highlighting influencers who are turning on him. So saying that this is a completely online issue is bullshit. But the thing is voters typically, when they're going to the ballot, box, they vote on interests that directly impact them. And Epstein does not directly impact them. And you can't really make a case. It's like, does Epstein impact your, gas prices? No. Does he impact the price of eggs? No. It's just a matter of topic that they have an interest in. And it's hard for people to have I'm using the term abstract. I'm not saying it's abstract in that it didn't happen. I'm just using it as abstract in that it's not directly affecting their day-to-day lives. It's hard to make people motivated to vote on that type of issue. I mean, even with like Trump, the issues, immigration began directly impacting people's lives because they had all these new migrants that popped out of nowhere, settle in their community, start committing crime, start draining public resources and other things. So it became not an abstract issue, as a direct issue. Same with the bad economy, same with the bad leadership shown by Kamala. That's something that is there. And so with voters, Epstein is not going to be an issue to affect the midterms. I do think it is an issue that is going to, the bigger impact is, and also most of the online influencers, which I talked about in my articles, like these MAGA influencers, they're going to get back on the Trump train and push him and promote him. So they'll be there. But the people who are probably not going to be inclined to promote Trump like they did in 2024 are the broadcasters. The broadcasters, I think, aren't happy. They weren't happy about the Iran strikes. They're generally anti-establishment. They don't like it supporting the establishment in itself. They like being populist and anti-establishment. And that makes it hard to support a government, the party in power. And the Epstein stuff further pushes them to just not be that supportive of Trump. I don't think they were going to be that big of Trump supporters or Republican cheerleaders in 2026 because, Trump's not on the ballot. They don't care about these boring Republicans. And their audience is just not the type of audience to turn out in 2026. But it could be a factor in 2028 when, whoever the successor is Trump is hoping to get these guys on board for 2028 and do the same type of promotion and advocacy that they did in 2028. But they'll be inclined not to do so. I think that's a longer term impact. Now, is that like a huge impact on the Republican Party? Is that a sign the base is entirely turned on him? No, but that is significant. That is notable. And I think that's what's going to be the effect of Epstein. But that's all my talk on Epstein. And we're now going to get to the topic of today, which comes from Armed Enjoyer. It's going to be our main topic, or at least the one I gave the title for, is that he had a question about what about modernity makes young men obsolete. He had an additional question, which, sometimes I think they mean to say it differently, but he's like, what jobs were women doing that made men laboring attractive to them since women won't date down? I'm not sure if he's meaning like what jobs women wanted that men were doing or what made jobs that were men laboring attractive. I guess it's like for women, they always wanted like high status guys. They wanted doctors and lawyers and finance guys. It was always doctors that was always like, oh, that's who I want, because it's like he's making a lot of money, he's saving lives, it's showing he's smart and stuff. So it's like that. I guess that's what you're asking. You might be asking something else. But the second question I can go off on, because this is a post that I made over the weekend that got a lot of controversy. Got it from the left. I was like, it was a breath of fresh air to get ratioed and attacked by leftists over my take, because generally I don't get leftists. It's generally other right wingers who get mad about my takes. And then to finally reach leftists and to see their idiocy, I was like, wow. Felt like 2019 again. I haven't seen this in a long time. So I always appreciate those posts. And it was all leftists who were mad about it. There were some boomers who were mad. They're like, oh, you kids just don't know how it's like. And these guys were just complete idiots when they were saying, they're like, they thought I said life has never been harder for young men, which is not the case. That's not what I said. I said they've never been less important and less regarded. And by like regarded, I mean as society really cares what they have to say and think, and that they set cultural trends. They do not set most cultural trends. Young women set cultural trends far more than young men now. It's like look at popular music. It's primarily dictated by female taste, and even a lot of other cultural trends are dictated by female taste. I mean, the fact that we now have Caitlin Clark and the WNBA as a thing. Nobody asked questions today, and that's like another topic. But that just demonstrates the power of young women on the culture and the market more than men. And also, young women are over 60% of college graduates now. That gives them a lot of power and influence. And just young men don't really matter that much. And for most of history, young men were the most important element of it. That's who they needed to fight war. That's who they needed to get jobs. That's if young men were pissed off and not doing well, that led to revolutions, etc. Society depended on young men. And also people didn't live that long. So, we still consider people under 40 young men, which, if we did that, like pretty much the entire society is young men. So, they were society. Young men were, and they had a tremendous power and tremendous influence as a group. Today, they just don't matter. They matter far less to society than they did 100 years ago. And so these idiots would go in and say it's never been harder. Like, well, in World War I, they were dying. It's like, yeah, that's how important they were. They wouldn't have been fighting World War I if they didn't have this many young men around and stress the importance of it. They fought the war. That's how important they were to these countries. And we don't really have that many young men anymore. I finally found the Wall Street Journal crime article that I've been telling people about, which I'm writing a blog about, or an article about this week, so be on the lookout for it. But they are under 5% of the U.S. population, and it's probably 4.5% because the projection, and I'm reading the projections from it because it makes note that one reason for the crime decline is that we're a much older population. The median age is nearly 40. I think it's 39. I did an article mentioning that, but I think it's 39. The white median age is 44, by the way. For young men, so young men are much important. So men 18 to 24, the guys committing most of the crime, well, it also would be teenagers as well. But they would be committing a substantial amount of crime. They're only 4.7% of the population, likely 4.5% of the population. It could even be lower depending on how projections went. So that's like a very small part of the population. And they're not setting cultural trends like they did 40 years ago. A lot of music taste back then was set by young men. It's like why rock and roll was so big was for young men. Young men were the ones most into it. Women followed along. Now we have, like even country music itself is dependent on female taste. It used to be that was dependent on male taste. But in any case, that's just showing how their relative unimportance. So that was what I was saying. There's also people who thought I said white men. No, I meant young men, even though it's implied young white men. And there's like idiots who are like, well, Trump's in office, so young men are in power. It's like Trump is almost 80. So I don't think he's a sensitive. I think he's even past the age where you can be a sensitive young man. For those who know the joke, sensitive young men. That's another. I probably shouldn't bring in the sensitive young men topic, but it is. With sensitive young men, I think once you hit 55, they're no longer sensitive young men. Sensitive young men is like 35 to 55. You're geriatric once you turn 22 and to 34. 35, you might still be a geriatric, but once you hit 40, you're definitely become a young man again. That's how a right-wing online right views youth, but that's another topic. In any case, The point is young men are, you could use the term obsolete in our society. And what makes them that way? Well, we're less dependent on physical strength for the jobs. If you went back in time, farm work, manufacturing, all these tasks in military, if that when, militaries were a much bigger thing, this was all dependent on men. Only men could do these jobs. Now today it's office work where women can do, and also the type of environment that a lot of offices promote. It's more conducive to female interests and female taste and female behavior. And it's the same with schools. Like schools, this begins at elementary school. Is that in elementary school, the young boys are wild. They're going crazy. They want to run around and go nuts. While the girls will just sit there dutifully and pay attention to the teacher while the men go crazy. And generally, the kindergarten, elementary school teachers always favor women. I think it was a common experience for boys growing up that they noticed that their teachers overwhelmingly favor the girls in class. And so it's dictated that then, like the women, that type of behavior, and that's the type of behavior that's awarded in white collar work, where a lot of the industries that are there, there are exceptions. Like tech is very autistic. Women can do very well because there's so few of them, and all these guys are simps and will pay them and can't get women, so they'll pay them a lot of money to be there. And the few women in tech have a great time, but it's overwhelmingly male dominated because it's very autistic. It's not suited to female aptitudes. Finance is still very male, but that's like a very masculine industry where it's like guys are like balls to the wall, taking high risks, high testosterone. So that's like another high risk thing. But law, academia, media, a lot of this other stuff is becoming increasingly female dominant. Even doctors and medical field. So a lot of this stuff is just overwhelmingly female. And that's even with like just standard white collar work. I don't know, like you're in an office job and maybe there's not a set profession there, but office environments are very female, especially due to HR rules and proper behavior. And women love following the rules and dictates the property and not and behaving at a time. It's just like it's type of behaviors that they demonstrated at the beginning of elementary school while guys didn't. And why guys often have to neuter themselves to fit into this environment, which has the effect of also making them less attractive to women. So that's the thing for young men. And so it's just a general society we have where it's no longer a society built on physical labor and masculine attributes, where you're supposed to demonstrate leadership and aggression and risk taking. Most office work is based on the opposite: risk aversion, following the leader, submission, so much to speak, and certainly not aggression. That is frowned upon. So it's female traits that are overwhelmingly favored in the white collar environment and what are encouraged. And I think it's as a society, we are so dedicated to female self-esteem now. If you look at these things, like, we have tons of programs dedicated to the self-esteem of young women. And whenever they talk about the problems of social media, it's entirely based around women's self-esteem. There is no concern for what's happening to men. I mean, what's happening with men on the internet for teenagers is like far worse. Like they're getting, trooned out and other stuff. It's like very bad, like what stuff can go for young men. But for young women, they'll be like, oh, they see a model who's not fat. This is encouraging body dysmorphia. And we have to like move heaven and earth to ban TikTok because they're seeing models who are not fat. And like, that's like the level of thing. And then we always have all these programs to encourage women to be in STEM or to just do anything. And so there's an overwhelming favoritism towards women in our society. I mean, simping is a major thing in our society. It's why, it even explains the Caitlin Clark phenomenon. I mean, she's a good athlete for a woman. I mean, she's the best female basketball player, but at the end of the day, it's still really boring to watch her play when you have male basketball players. Like, it's far more interesting to watch Cooper Flag play than it is Caitlin Clark. In any case, so this is the type of society they have. And then men themselves are making less money. They're more likely to be unemployed. There's now the case where male unemployment for non-college grads and college grads are the same. So even though that would encourage a lot of people to say, oh, this is why you shouldn't go to college. I mean, but at the same time, all the women are going to college, and the only way to even try to win a lot of these women is to go to college yourself. So that's happening. And so women are starting to out-earn men in certain areas. They're certainly getting more education than men. And this has the effect of, of that type of effect. So there is that unemployment. And also the unemployment levels among college graduates is all due to men. It's not due to college educated women are doing fine. It's men. And I think it's also some of the favoritism that's even the hiring market is that a lot of employers and people are more inclined to hire women than they are men. And generally the office environment is better for women because there's fewer expectations and fewer demands on women. They are more conciliatory to their mess ups and what they're able to do towards women than it is for men. And women could say if they get fired or whatever, it's like sexism. It's harder for men to fire that type of lawsuit. So there are just more obsolete in society in general, all across the board, and that's what it is. And so and when people still think that young men lead in the society, but they don't. I mean, we're a very old society. The fact that, like, even my jokes about sensitive young men, that we now have guys in their 40s insisting that they're sensitive young men or young men. And it's not even just a political thing. I mean, it's even a thing among, like, normie Gen Xers. That wouldn't have been the case before. I mean, pretty much everyone who was 45 admitted that they're middle-aged. Now they're like, oh, I might be approaching middle age as they're 50. It's a sign that the actual young men are not in charge. And we put a lot of mythology and or creative mythology and a lot of emphasis on what the young men are doing. And a lot with the right, they think that, like, oh, we're winning over the young men. We've got the future because everyone follows young men. Meanwhile, these same guys are insisting that they are young men at age 40 and that their tastes and interests are the same as that of a guy who's 22, which is not the case. And so that is indicative of what it is like for young men. And people just live a lot longer. We're much more of a society built around around old people, and old people are hoarding a lot of the wealth. It's a lot harder to buy a home, a lot harder to save money. A lot of the economy is now a predatory capitalism designed to exploit and take every single dime from young men, whether it's through sports gambling or OnlyFans or crypto scams or whatever. It's very exploitative for young men. And young men are generally going to have worse financial prospects, worse dating prospects, worse cultural reverence than or lower cultural reverence than they've ever had before. And they're just not leaders. The leaders today are more young women and old people. Old people are the most politically powerful group by far, and then young women are the most culturally powerful group. Young men are an afterthought. And some people think that's going to change, but it's like, unlike a lot of other societies where there was a huge surplus of young men, and if they were not getting jobs, if they were not getting married, if they were really angry and alienated, that was a huge problem. That would create social revolutions. Today, the young men, you don't really have to worry about them. I mean, they just, play video games and other things. And they're not that, they don't really threaten society because there's a smaller number of them. There's limited ability to unite them as a collective block for their interests like it would have been for the proletariat or whatever. And they're just not there. But as a country, it is no country for young men in a lot of ways. I mean, it's still good for young men because in general, life is like modern society can be good if you're young. You don't have the responsibilities you did. You've got better health. You've got a more positive outlook. You should have a more positive outlook. But at the same time, young men are less able to earn the same amount of money as their Gen X and millennial peers. They have fewer opportunities. The job market is really bad for young college graduates, and it's primarily bad as the data is showing, as I tweeted out over the weekend, is primarily for college educated men and men in general. So it's tough out there for young men. That's not to say it's been the worst of young men, but at those times, like, young men were a more important part of society. Is that we had a level of deference to young men, and if they were struggling, the rest of society would feel it. Now that they're struggling and we just don't give a shit, and all of our attention is paid towards old men and young women. And that's like the two dominant elements of our society. Middle-aged women are also not really cared for, but whatever. Those are the two groups that determine most of everything in society. So it is no country for young men in a lot of ways. That's not to say everything's bad. I mean, you can make the best of it depending on your circumstances, but a lot of young men are struggling right now. And it is and it's not a victimhood complex to point that out. If it's like seeing that they're having higher rates of unemployment, they have higher rates of, alcohol, drug abuse, if they have higher rates of, depression and suicide, and then you're going to say, there's no victimhood complex. You guys are just complaining. Meanwhile, the people saying it are like mentally ill, gender pronoun people. That's it. And it's also rich for us to say that when our whole society is built around crying over women, like getting body dysmorphia because they realize they're fat and their social Instagram is showing them not fat people. So like, it's hard to really care. But in any case, that is an issue. And I think it's actually going to get worse, the alienation for young men, as that, as our society is not moving towards a model increasingly favoring physical labor. Even though there's this whole push to get trade jobs, where it's not like we view tradesmen as our new doctors and lawyers. We still have the same social attitude towards them. We just want more men to do it because, we feel they're an afterthought and we want to push them out of the way and just like, here's a job, do whatever, don't bother us. It's not like, oh, wow, you're a plumber, you're the new financier, all the women want you. That's not really the case. So that even goes along with the element of conservatism, is conservatism want all young men to become tradesmen, but they still encourage young women to go to college and to pursue their dreams. Meanwhile, for young men, you're not allowed to have dreams or ambitions. You're just supposed to accept life as it is and accept whatever shit you're given. And if you don't have a job, that's entirely your fault. If you don't have a good social life, that's entirely your fault. If you're not happy with your job, tough shit, everything sucks for you. But if you're a young woman, if you even have a minor problem with your job, like the whole world drops whatever they're doing to reassure you of that everything's okay. And so now, and granted, we always previously in societies we accepted that women were, more fragile people, needed more support, but we're built on egalitarianism, and really women are doing better. So it is, once again, it's not quite equality if we're have one set of standards for the people struggling, and then a completely different, lighter standards for the people who are thriving. Society has probably never been better for young women. They have more freedom, more money, more opportunities than their mothers and grandmothers could have dreamed of. And depending on their circumstances, they went to a good college and now go to a major city. They literally get to live out like this dream life that has been promoted by TV shows and other things with them. They get to travel the world, and they're essentially given like 2 months of vacation to do whatever. And it's a completely different experience for young women to young men. But I think these, I guess the black pill is I think these problems are going to continue because it's a cultural matter. You can't really have like Trump executive order, like we're helping young men. The only way to really help young men is if their earning power begins to outstrip women again and that their job prospects improve. If that happens, then you'll see improvement in this, but I'm bearish on that possibility with this decade. It might happen over time. But there's just other problems with young men. I think young men, it's why so many young men are getting into radical politics because radical online politics because, they see that their power and status is slipping away compared to their fathers and grandfathers. And generally, the biggest motivator of political radicalism is threatened status and the feeling that your life is worse than what it should be or what it is of your parents and grandparents. And threatened status is a huge motive, especially for right-wing radicalism. So that is my take on young men. So we'll go to Arm Day Enjoyer's second question. He says, during the first term, the online right was frustrated with Trump during the 2017 Syrian strikes, 2018 Syrian strikes, and by spring of 2019. Although many came back when the Forbes headline of immigration dropping came out. No one remembers that, so they didn't really come back. Do you think it was more intense back then or now? Oh, no, it's far more intense now. People would go back and forth, but by spring of 2019, it had the anti-Trump right from the far right had really crystallized. And this is when people began making it their whole personality. As people went back and forth, whether it be pro-Trump or anti-Trump. One thing is with Charlottesville that they were not really on the Trump trade at that time. There was no Trump gear. There was no American flags there. There was hardly any of that, which helped, isolate them from the rest of the population and make them easier to attack. But it kept up. But it was by spring of 2019. Some of his statements about immigration where he sounded like he wanted some deal on immigration. He reneged on it and he never. And actually, immigration, they began pushing it down. Nobody remembers the Forbes headline. That's assuming that people were reading news. It was more. That's when it crystallized. But you could argue that even though I don't think it was the right thing, you could argue that there was more grounds for it. I mean, Trump was not compared to now, he was not doing anything in the first term, especially in the first 2 years. There was nothing. I mean, besides the travel ban and his resistance to further engagement in Syria, there was not much there. He was still pushing the conversation forward, but there were not many accomplishments. I mean, by 2019, he was beginning to do more. And then in 2020, he banned critical race theory. He did the immigration moratorium. He brought down refugee numbers to the lowest rate ever. He was doing some things, but it was smaller then. But today, he's doing a whole lot more. But there is far more intense anti-Trump hatred. And it's far more prevalent from a right-wing perspective. And I think that's just the nature of our growth and the online sphere in general. The online sphere really doesn't feel like it needs to be involved in politics, or people online could just create whatever reality they want. And if there's some minor issue that they have, they will just turn on Trump and say we want something else, and they can make themselves pretended because the rest of the audience lives in fantasy land where there's no other alternative to Trump. Or they imagine that there's a serious alternative to Trump, and we're going to do this by withholding our vote. And no, it's definitely far more intense because the online right is far bigger, and a lot of the motivations is due to rivalries with other right-wing figures and other things that it encourages people to become anti-Trump. It's also a lot of Europeans and non-Americans are involved now and have big influences, and they don't really have an interest in being pro-Trump. I mean, he's not their president. So there's that. No, I think it's more intense now. People didn't really come back and forth. I mean, it was just a smaller sphere. It was also a more controlled sphere. I think with some of this isn't a good thing with the censorship because you could just get banned over nothing. in 2019, but it was more of a controlled sphere where people could direct energy certain ways. There was a lot of anti-Trump stuff in 2020, especially in the lead up to, well, it's more in spring and summer 2020. There was a lot of intense Trump animosity, but it never mattered in the elections. I think today, due to the influence of the online right and just, even the Rumble sphere, there's more interest in it because they know there's an online audience for it. They know that there's a bigger audience for anti-Trumpism from the right than there was in 2019 and 2020. And people are more engaged in it. So, and people have made it more of their identity. Really, the only people who were anti-Trump consistently from 2019 were just Wignats. And some of them returned to Trump, supporting Trump for the 2020 election. Not a lot, but some. But that was the only element. But it's a far bigger element now. And a lot of these guys, a lot of those old Wignats, they think that Trump is the ultimate enemy. So it's not even so much that they turn on Trump. It's that they decide that he is worse than even Democrats or liberals or whoever enemy they have. So I would say it's bigger and more intense. Matters more because in 2020 it was just the small sphere of Wignats. They didn't get that many likes, engagement. Well, like anti-Trump posts today will get like 100K likes from the right, and you even have like Elon Musk pushing it. I mean, from a different direction. And Elon Musk, is an influential figure. You don't really have that influential figure. Whether it's coming from the right, I don't know, but it's certainly coming for Elon. It's coming from the online sphere. So that is my question for that, or not my question, my answer for that. Let's see, we're gonna go to the Coldplay kiss cam. We got one. Hornet's got a question for it. He said, "Did Andy Byron, Coldplay guy, deserve to lose his job? I saw the woman he was kissing hasn't resigned yet. Is she going to say she was taken advantage of and try to get a payday out of this?" I haven't really followed the fallout from this. One, if you're like the CEO and you have like this bad of public PR, you probably should lose your job. I mean, you shouldn't cheat on your wife. You shouldn't engage in adultery. But, that is a personal matter. But if it becomes a public matter where your whole company is just known by you being the Coldplay adulterer, then you're probably going to lose your job. You can't really say this guy doesn't deserve it. It's like, look, you guys are old, you're married, if you're that stupid to go to a Coldplay concert where other people, the public can see you there, like, they could have run into their neighbor or something. And it's like, that is so dumb to go on a date there. But it does show, once again, the double standard for men and women. It's like, women engaging in adultery is not frowned upon. They are never at fault. It's entirely the man at fault. Women can get away with it. There's no public repercussions. There's really no shaming of it. It's like, look at all these women in politics who have engaged in adultery. MTG. I don't know if Colbert was, but it was. Joni Ernst. Joni Ernst was sexting with a general. I don't know if she's still married, but that would not count as, if that was a man, doing it with another man, that would be a big story. But say if it was a congressman, there would be a lot more shaming of him. There was a story. Kristi Noem. Kristi Noem definitely cheated on her husband, and there was no political repercussions for that. With Katie Hill, who was a Democratic congresswoman, who was like the first millennial congresswoman, she got ousted for her polyamory, or not for her polyamory, but she had these nudes and stuff, and it turned out she was sleeping with a staffer, which they had put these rules in place due to Me Too, and then she was like one of the first to suffer for it. There was no concern that she was cheating on her husband. It was all, and she was turned into a victim herself. even though she was doing this, even though I think it was agreed that she was polyamorous, whatever. There's no public repercussions for women cheating. It's only men who suffer from this. Their society does not shame them, and a lot of women encourage it as girl power. So that's that. But I want to. The more important thing about the Coldplay Kiss Cam is how important it is to normies. This is the number one story for them. If you go to TikTok and you go to Facebook Reels and other thing, or I don't know if it's Facebook. This is how old I'm sounding. If you go to Reels, YouTube Shorts, you go to this, all Coldplay Kiss Cam content. You know, the fact that the Phillies mascots parodied it, satirized it. We're gonna say that's a better way of saying it. You know, that shows how popular appeal it is, that everyone knows about this. This is the Hawk Tuah of this summer. Everyone in America knew about Hawk Tuah Girl last year. Now they all know about the Coldplay Kiss Cam. They can't get enough of this content. There is endless arrays of it. I mean, it relates to normal behavior or normal everyday experience. It's something that it has villains you can not want to sympathize with. You know, it's like a cold, conniving, wealthy guy who is openly cheating on his wife with his hussy, and everyone, and the fact that they, you know, had this hilarious reaction towards it where the guy like fell out of the picture and the woman turned around and her face in shame. And, you know, the reaction, the funny thing is that they could have just sat there and just like waved and no one would have probably noticed. But the fact that they had this, maybe not done the kiss cam, maybe not kissed, but just like said, oh, no, they would have had that, but then they turned around to that. And so, you know, cheating, it's both, you know, that's a universal deplorable behavior that everyone can relate to and really hate, as along with the reaction of shame, and makes it really funny, and it's just something that can appeal to people. And just the scenario of it is like a Coldplay Kiss Cam at a stadium where they didn't expect it. You know, they like those ordinary experiences that turn into major things, but this is intensely viral. This is what all the normie internet is talking about. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not talking about Epstein. They are talking about Epstein more than probably the Iran strikes. But the Coldplay Kiss Cam is probably more important or more discussed among normies than the Iran strikes. And that's just what it is. I mean, it's just it's designed for normie content. And you really see this a lot. Kind of becomes annoying with, I guess, online, right? People, I find it amusing. I haven't seen that much content because I'm not on TikTok and Instagram and the normie sphere, so I don't get it as much. But I know a lot of people are getting upset about it, and they're always like, "Why is X talking about this?" I don't think there's any intellectual discussion to talk about beyond that. Even with the woman getting fired, it's like he's in the position of power there. You know, he's the CEO. They can argue for that. I could see this woman say, "Oh, I was a victim." Well, actually, I'm not. She's absolutely going to do that because she wants to save her reputation and maybe even her marriage or whatever. But that's that. And so it's just perfectly designed for normies. But you have to remind yourself that like a lot of things we discuss and care about is not what normies discuss and care about. They care about these frivolous stuff like the Coldplay Kiss Cam, the Hawk Tuah Girl, you know, the latest NBA trade or whatever. They care about stuff like that. And so a lot of people, you misunderstand what like we're intensely discussing on Twitter. You know, the normie sphere is like not even aware of that. And so that's worth keeping in mind with what stuff there is. Now, I got a bunch of questions about Stephen Colbert getting canceled. I probably maybe even should have done that as a second, but I don't know if there's much to say there beyond the obvious. Dollar Bill had this. He said, "What are your thoughts that Stephen Colbert's show will be ending in May 2026? His show was essentially a televised rally for the Democratic Party with a thin veneer of comedy and gave us cringe moments like Skibidi Biden and Colbert dancing with people in syringe costumes to promote the COVID vaccine." And Hornet also asked about it as like, "What is your reaction?" And also the crazy vaccine dance. It's just like late night comedy. The way it's situated now is a relic of its time. And you can see it by this audience. They got Colbert 10 years, over a decade ago. I guess it was 2015. And he was supposed to get young people. Because at this time, people might not remember. It was like Colbert was considered a young, funny, I guess slightly edgy comedian because he had a lot of millennial support due to his Stephen Colbert character and other things. And they thought he could bring young people there. And their average audience was like 60. It's now gone up to 68. So it's completely old people, and it's not the audience you want. Every TV network wants 18 to 49. And if you're not getting anyone in that age group, then why the hell you're there? And it's very expensive to host it. And these late night TV shows, they're all designed for deranged libtard boomers who, watch CNN and MSNBC all day and then want lame jokes about CNN and MSNBC clips there. And it's not as entertainment oriented. I grew up watching like Jay Leno and Conan O'Brien. I really liked Conan O'Brien when I was a kid. And it was all entertainment focused. It wasn't that political. And it was all like jokes about movies and stuff. It's now gone into very lame political jokes and the dancy vaccines. And it's just a rally. And so it's just libtard propaganda. And no one finds it that funny or that endearing. Kimmel's probably even worse because he's a lot more mean-spirited than even Colbert. Which, I think Trump threatened Kimmel's next. Probably is Kimmel's next. But this is just a format that's no longer there. Is that these late night TV shows, when they were originally out there, a lot of them were directed, or 80s and 90s, they try to get a younger audience. And they got that with Dave Letterman, and they got that with Conan O'Brien. And now it's completely old people. Complete change of audience, and they want young people. But the only way that they can get a young audience back is by getting these broadcasters. But the broadcasters are probably a bit too edgy for them. But if they really want to draw in a demographic, it's to get one of the broadcasters and lean more on the streaming elements of their program, not just limit it to the 11 o'clock slot or whatever they have, and allow it to be streamed, and they would have a much younger audience. And a lot of these guys could do that. Whether they're willing to do that, I don't know. But that's the only way to save late night TV format. But it is like a relic of a previous time. Like Johnny Carson and all these guys, that was a time period where people sat around at the TV. There was only a few network options, and these people spoke for middle America with their humor and attitudes. And Colbert didn't do that. And that's why he failed. And that's why we're talking about him now. So that is my thoughts on Colbert getting canceled. It is showing a move to a general right-wing culture. I don't want to say right-wing culture, but a less libtarded mainstream culture is a better way of saying this. Is that in the 2010s, like Colbert, Kimmel, all their rants and stuff, they would all be instantly covered by the news, and Mediaite and all these places would blurb about it. Today, they're not blurbed about, because those media outlets that existed just to write up, random shit that happened on CNN or late night TV are, in a downward spiral. They're themselves struggling even more than late night TV. So there's not that cultural cachet that they have anymore. And it's like, why are they still there? They feel late night TV in itself, the way the format is a relic of a time period where pre-streaming, where people would sit and watch network TV and let that show come on and stuff. But it's no longer the case today. So next question comes from Goucher, college valedictorian. He asks, getting a little politically incorrect here, he talks about blacks in public spaces where they simply did not exist even 5 to 10 years ago. Is there any way to solve that the American public actually has a stomach for, i.e. other things that are rolling back civil rights? Well, I think the Carnival Cruise line of just banning music, banning speakers, banning weed, banning certain attitudes and dress styles, that's probably the only way to really do it, in my opinion. I think you can. They're definitely more in public space, and I think that's the wider dispersion of credit to their communities, to where they could just take out loans and blow up on credit card debt, and so now they go to airports and all these other things. And that would be another way to limit it. I guess, even though I've been a little bit critical of the credit card limits, if it would definitely hurt the economy, but it would probably help public spaces if we did that. So that would be one way to do it, is credit card reform and basic standards like what is done with that, or with not with Carnival Cruise Line rather. We got Luke. Luke asked, "Do you think we should have listened to MacArthur and used nuclear weapons during the Korean War?" No, that would have led to World War III. No, it's smart that Truman reined him in and then fired him. MacArthur was going too crazy. I mean, MacArthur was in his 70s at the time, and he was losing some of his marbles. So no, we should have not used nuclear weapons during the Korean War. We eventually got a sort of victory in that we defended South Korea. We ensured that the South Korean border was respected. Obviously, North Korea still exists, but it worked. It was a much more productive end to the war than what Vietnam was. So no, that would be my answer to that. We've got Gillis Enjoyer. He says, "Why did the attempt to deport Mahmoud Khalil fail? My understanding is that Rubio, Secretary of State, has the authority to deport any non-citizen who is a threat to our foreign policy goals, and that determination is entirely up to his judgment. Is it just an activist judge who will get overruled by SCOTUS eventually?" Well, he has a green card. He's married to an American citizen, and he's got a lot of legal support. It's a matter of legal battles. We'll see what SCOTUS says. This is one of the few things that I'm a little skeptical SCOTUS could do. But it is obviously an activist judge, but it does become harder with the situation, and also the claims that we're making that he's a dangerous threat. It's harder. It's a little bit harder with Hamas support than it is for straight communism during the Cold War. I generally support trying to deport these people because they're going to be the worst leftists there is, but I do understand that it's harder to get people who aren't necessarily overt Hamas supporters. They would have to find he had a chant that's similar to Hamas, and it's like, oh, there's a guy with a Hamas shirt next to him. It's not so much of a direct cut and dry case like this guy's a member of the Communist Party. He says he's a communist. We're getting him out of there. So it becomes a little bit more difficult. We'll see what SCOTUS does, but it was always going to be a tough case to deport him. And a lot of people get always depressed over whenever judges make a call that we don't like. But what do you expect? So, second question: you said recently that you could see Tucker running in 2028. Do you think it's fair to say we wouldn't see him as a good candidate as we would a few years ago? His views on immigration and other identity issues are all fairly standard amongst the right now, and he also brings a lot of baggage in terms of his ICP tendencies. Fox Tucker circa 2019-2022 would have been an amazing candidate, but now I don't think he'd stand out as much. Well, it is true he wouldn't stand out as much, and what would make him stand out is both his charisma, which is a good thing, and then his willingness to go after issues that others wouldn't. Some of it's interesting and bold, like Israel. Others, it's demonic UFOs that I don't know would be a good thing to run on as a campaign. But he denied he ever wants to run for president. I don't think he really has the discipline or desire to really be a normal politician, because he likes to just say what he wants to say. He doesn't really like scrutiny of his family, which there would be a lot of scrutiny of his family if there is, which is not so much like his family's up to no good. It's more that, he doesn't like media attention towards his kids and his wife. That's a normal person's attitude towards this. And he also just wants to say what he wants to say. I don't think he wants to do the politician game of trying to please all these coalitions and restricting what he wants to say. But I could see him running depending on the circumstances of the time and what issues he wants to highlight. But I don't think of him as so much successor, because a thing we were worried about with Trump is that the next person, they would try to replace him with a Glenn Youngkin or somebody who would try to revert the party back to the pre-Trump era. That's not going to be the case in 2028. Every candidate is going to be competing to be the most Trumpian, most Trump-like candidate. and we're not returning to the pre-Trump era. So Tucker would not have that advantage that we would have considered maybe in 2023. Everyone else would be doing that. He would be more Trump than Trump himself, and maybe even the anti-Trump candidate from the right if he ran in 2028, which I don't think that would be a successful campaign. It would get him a lot of attention, but it would probably not work to get him elected. Okay, now from a unpronounceable, he says, Scott, what do you think is the mindset of the average ICE agent these days? Of course, I'd assume almost all are right wing, but I wonder how many are ideological nativists versus blue collar types just collecting a paycheck. I don't really know. I think most would probably be blue collar types collecting a paycheck, but there is a degree of awareness of these issues and hostility towards illegal immigrants, and knowing that they're bad people and that we need to get them out. I don't think there's complete ideological, compartmentalization there. It's hard for them to be ideological nativists when a lot of them are Hispanic, but I think they really have a hostility towards illegal immigrants. They do think that a lot of them are criminals and gangbangers and they want them out. And I don't think that they have much of a guilty conscience about what they're doing. But I would say they're probably mostly blue-collar types. Not so much collecting a paycheck, as I do think that they think their mission is important and agree with it. But it's for them a cool job where they get to arrest bad people and send them to where they came from. I don't think there's so much of an ideological component towards it. But there is probably an instinctual nativism where they think that what they're doing is good. They want fewer illegal immigrants and they like that they deport them. But that's it for their attitude towards it. And finally, concluding with New England refugee, L.K. Rurik wanted his questions for the mailbag, so we'll keep them for the mailbag. He said, New England refugee said, is there anything we could do to punish or humiliate Maria Salazar, who's the Republican pushing for amnesty? They disgust me. Well, that is an understandable reaction. Problem with Salazar, she's in an area where it's like very Hispanic and that they support amnesty because it's like Cubans and they view it as like cheap labor. You could primary her, but it's probably not the issue that you would get to primary her. And ultimately, Trump knows she's trying to present herself as super pro-Trump and that this is all based around Trumpian issues. So that would be tough for her to campaign on. But, I don't know what she's going to do with that. So it'd be tough to punish her. She's always going to... The thing is, the most important thing is to ignore her. She pushes an amnesty bill every congressional term. She does this all the time. She got a few more Republicans. There's some I think it's more the Republicans who are co-sponsoring that should be a problem. The issue is, with Trump, his standard is whether they're pro-me or anti-me. Which does become problems with certain people there'll be people like Lindsey Graham and others who are not very Trumpian, but then they're very pro-Trump and he supports them. But it's gotten better over time because in order to be really pro-Trump, you have to adopt a lot of his policy positions and his attitudes on a variety of topics. And that becomes harder for, say, a Salazar to get away with pushing, amnesty and other things when the rest of the party, in order to be more Trumpian, is very anti-immigration. So, but it's tough for her district. That's a district that's probably one of the Republican districts that's most supportive of amnesty due to its demographic makeup. So that is my answer to that. And that is that is it for Highly Respected today. We're going to have more great content this week, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.